Assalamu alaikum. Our tutorial today about the neck region. My approach is to describe how we divide the lateral cervical region and the exact position or the layer of the muscles on the cervical fascia. My name is Joan and I'm noted anatomist. Today we will first know the main landmark of the neck. Okay. Here in this model, as you see here, we have those muscle, this one, sternocleidomastoid, as it takes its name. It arises by two heads from the manubrium sterni and medial end of the clavicle, ascend upward to be inserted on the mastoid process here, mastoid process, and some fibers extend to the superior nuchal line. The other important landmark of the neck is the trapezius muscle. Here is the trapezius, muscle. Okay, trapezius actually it is a diamond shape or trapezoid shape muscle. Okay, both sides. One side it is triangular. It is arises from or extend from the superior nuchal line, ligamentum nuchae, okay, and from the lower thoracic spines. Okay, all fibers are inserted to the scapular spine or spine of the scapula and to the acromion process of the scapula and to the distal third of the clavicle or lateral third of the clavicle. Actually, the insertion of the trapezius is opposite to the origin of deltoid muscle. If you look here carefully, look, there is fiber of deltoid here from the lateral third of the clavicle. Okay, also from the middle fiber from the acromion process, and those fibers or posterior fibers are from the spine of the scapula. Okay, so the two landmark muscles are trapezius and sternocleidomastoid. In addition to the midline here, we have the mandible here, and then we have the midline, the median sagittal plane of the body at this point. So, before started to elaborate in the model, I will show you how to study the triangles of the neck. Assume here this is the mastoid process. Here is styloid process. It should be a little bit directed anteriorly. Okay, this is mastoid process, and then we have to draw here the mandible. Here is the mandible. Here is the half of the sternum, okay, and here's the clavicle, okay. Now draw the borders of the lateral cervical region. Now here in this, we assume that the lateral border or the lateral surface of the neck like flat sheets, okay. Now here, posteriorly, we have this border of trapezius muscle. So here we have the posterior fibers or the anterior border of trapezius, TRA, trap, okay, trapezius. Then, ascending from manubrium sternum to the and medial end of the clavicle, we have what? The sternocleidomastoid muscle, okay, and then anteriorly, as I said, we have what? The midline. Okay, so now after this, we can easily locate these triangles here on the neck. If you look now, yeah, okay, I draw very large clavicle. Okay, yeah, let me please. Yes, it's like this here. Now, if you look, this is trapezius, this is sternocleidomastoid, this is clavicle, and this is midline. Okay. Okay, now let us apply the borders that we have here. These borders, what we have here, okay, in the triangles. So, for each triangle, you have to know again the borders, the content, the roof, and the floor. Okay. So here, for the posterior triangle, the anterior border is formed by the posterior aspect or posterior border of sternocleidomastoid. The anterior border is by the anterior border of trapezius, the posterior border of the triangle by anterior border of trapezius, and the base of the triangle by the clavicle. Okay, so the triangle has an apex above and base below. The roof of this triangle, of course, is formed by skin, superficial fascia containing part of the platysma muscle, and some of cutaneous nerves. The floor consists of group of muscle. Those are semispinalis cavities, splenius cavities, levator scapulae, scalene anterior, scalene medius and scalene anterior. Again, all those group actually are within the prevertebral cervical fascia. So the floor first is covered by the prevertebral fascia, and then underneath the prevertebral fascia you find this group of muscle. Again, from posterior, the vertical fibers here, the vertical fibers are for the semispinalis cavities. and then splenius cavities. Both of them cavities means related to the skull. Okay, both cavities, spinalis cavities, splenius cavities, and then levator scapulae. This is levator scapulae, and here is scalene medius, and here is scalene anterior. Okay, this is the group of muscle that form the floor of the occipital triangle. If you see this muscle here, this small muscle is ascend anteriorly on the posterior triangle and then cross beneath the sternocleidomastoid. This belly of muscle divide the posterior triangle into two small triangles. Divide the triangle into two small triangles. This part is called occipital triangle, and this part is called supraclavicular triangle. Supraclavicular triangle. Okay. Now come to the content of each subdivision. The occipital triangle contain mainly, actually the distal part here is coming from here, the last portion of the occipital artery. Occipital artery is come here like this, enter this region, okay, accompanied with small lymph nodes, okay, have small lymph node around it. Also, we have this nerve. This is cranial nerve number 11, spinal accessory nerve. Spinal accessory nerve. Okay, spinal accessory nerve descend through jugular foramen. Okay, so it exit through jugular foramen and then enter the deep surface of sternocleidomastoid, supplying this muscle, give motor supply to this muscle, and then exit the muscle between the junction of superior third with lower two-thirds, and then cross the occipital triangle to enter the deep surface of trapezius muscle, also on the point that between the junction between upper two-thirds with lower third of the anterior border of trapezius muscle. Another nerves, those are branches. What you see here, those are branches of cervical plexus, superficial or cutaneous branch of the cervical plexus. For example, this is lesser occipital, ascend upward within this border, ascend upward to the occipital or to supply the back of the skull. Also, we have, this is auricular branches, okay, to supply the skin behind the auricle. Then we have transverse cervical nerves. Those are transverse cervical nerves. It ascend anteriorly, ascend transverse and anteriorly to supply the skin over this region here. And then we have the supraclavicular nerves. Supraclavicular nerves, those also descend vertically to supraclavicular region. So this point here, where these all nerves exit the border of sternocleidomastoid, is called a point of the neck. It is an important point because most of the subcutaneous most of the cutaneous nerves exit this point and become superficial. Also, at this point, the accessory nerve again cross the floor of the posterior triangle to supply the trapezius muscle. On the supraclavicular region, or the greater supraclavicular fossa, this is also called careful zone. It's called careful zone, and because it contains structures, important structure, the trunks of the brachial plexus, to the, which gives nerve supply to the upper limb. It contains supraclavicular lymph nodes, and also contains the subclavian artery. Contain parts of the subclavian artery when exit between the scalene hiatus. Here at this point, here, actually, between a scalene medius and scalenus anterior, there is a small triangle or small aperture. This is called scalenus hiatus, and it gives exit to the brachial plexus roots, and also it gives passage to the subclavian artery. Subclavian vein does not exist between the two scalene muscle. It just runs anterior to the anterior scalene here at this position. Okay, and then of course at the outer border of the first strip it become axillary vein. Both. Okay, vessels become axillary vessels. Okay, so now coming back to our diagram. The anterior triangle also is subdivided into 4 small triangles. Okay, and this is as follows. Okay, actually we have the hyoid bone here. We have the hyoid bone at the level of C3, cervical vertebra. Those levels are important, please. You have to consider them. Okay, we have the hyoid bone. We have the hyoid bone here. This is the greater cone. This is the lesser cornea of hyoid bone. Okay. Now, what happened? There is muscle that origin by 2 bellies. One from the gastric fossa on the mandible, from the gastric here, and the other one arises from mastoid fossa, just medial to the mastoid process. It's called posterior belly of the gastric, and this is called anterior belly of the gastric. So this is posterior belly of the gastric, anterior belly of the gastric, met at the midline, and then attached by a fibrous or intermediate tendon to the greater hernia of the hyoid bone. Okay, we have again, as I said, there is small muscle arise from the shoulder, or from, as it is named, sorry, it should be like this. Okay, as it is named, the rise here is called omohyoid. Omohyoid ascent, okay, from the shoulder. Omo means shoulder or scapula. Okay, and ascent here, and then both belly are met behind, also by intermediate tendon, behind the sternocleidomastoid, and then ascend to the inferior surface of the hyoid bone. Now by those bellies, the anterior triangle is divided into 4 triangles with the presence, of course, of the midline. Okay, number 1 triangle here, this is number 1. It's called submental triangle. Submental triangle is bounded by anterior belly of digastric, by the hyoid bone inferiorly, and by the another or the other side of anterior belly of digastric. So right and left bellies of digastric, anterior belly, digastrous muscle, hyoid bone inferiorly. And this is the only unpaired triangle of the neck, only unpaired. The others, all other triangles in the neck are paired, except the submental triangle. The second triangle is located here, okay, and this is called digastric triangle or submandibular triangle. The submandibular triangle is formed actually or bordered by the anterior belly of digastric, posterior belly of digastric, lower border of mandible, here lower border of mandible, this is N, and the line that extends from the mandible to the styloid mastoid process, okay? So this is called submandibular triangle. Then number 3, we have carotid triangle. This is carotid triangle bounded by posterior belly of digastric, by the superior belly of omohyoid and anterior border of sternocleidomastoid. The last triangle, number 4, is muscular triangle, is bounded by the midline, superior belly of omohyoid and the anterior border of sternocleidomastoid. Now come and locate those triangles on our model. So now when we locate this to our model, so see here is submental triangle, here is digastric triangle, here is carotid triangle, and here is muscular triangle. Okay, I hope this makes things clear for you. Now we have to talk about each triangle individually. Submental triangle is, as I said, a simple triangle, is formed by two right and left bellies of digastric, anterior belly of digastric, this is anterior belly of digastris. So right and left bellies of digastris is from the submental triangle. The floor of the triangle is formed by mylohyoid muscle. This is mylohyoid muscle. It contains small submental lymph nodes in addition to the submental vessels. So again, submental triangle here. This is anterior belly of digastris. This is hyoid bone. Here this is hyoid bone. And then on the other side we have the another anterior belly of digastris. Okay, so it is one triangle. Okay. Now come to the second triangle, is called digastris triangle or submandibular triangle. This triangle is bounded again by anterior villi of digastric, posterior villi of digastric, lower border of the mandible, and the line extends from the angle of the mandible to the mastoid process here. So this is the triangle at this point. The floor of this triangle is formed mainly by, again, mylohyoid muscle and hyoglossus muscle. Mylohyoid beside hyoglossus muscle here. This is hyoglossus muscle, ascend from the hyoid bone to insert in the tongue, one of extrinsic muscle of the tongue. What are the content of this triangle? It contains, as you see here, submandibular gland. And as we know, this gland has a superficial part of the gland, and we have the deep part of the gland within the space between the hyoglossus and mylohyoid. Okay. We have also the structure that run in this. We have the lingual artery running deep to the gland or deep to the hyoglossus with lingual nerve. We have the facial artery. Yes, this is the facial artery. This is the facial artery. And we have facial vein. Okay. We have the anterior division of retromandibular vein. We have the hypoglossal nerve. I don't see any of them. Most of them are deep. Okay. Those are also beside the submandibular lymph node also. So this is facial artery here. This is facial artery, giving submental branch, long cylinder branch, or submental branch. The third triangle here is carotid triangle. Carotid triangle is bounded again by posterior villi of digastric, anterior villi of anterior border of sternocleidomastoid, superior villi of omohyoid. The floor of this triangle is mainly formed by hypoglossus, middle and inferior constrictors of the pharynx. The most important things with this triangle is contain the carotid sheath, containing the carotid sheath with structures inside it. We have the internal carotid artery and internal jugular vein and the vagus between them. In this model, those structures are not clear. I will look for them in another model. Okay, just know now contain the last third cranial nerve, vagus, accessory, and hypoglossal nerve. It also contain the internal carotid artery and internal jugular vein. Also contain the ansa cervicalis, a branch or loop from the cervical plexus of nerve. Okay. Okay, here, if you look here, this is common carotid artery. This is common carotid artery, and we know that at the upper border of thyroid cartilage, the common carotid artery is divided into external and the internal carotid artery. Okay, external and internal carotid artery. So within the carotid triangle, can find the can find the internal carotid artery, and also can find the common carotid artery. Okay, as I told you, we found the hypoglossal nerve. This is hypoglossal nerve when cross superficial to the external carotid artery. Okay, this is hypoglossal nerve, and also in giving this descendants hypoglossi, which form the superior root of ansa cervicalis. This is ansa cervicalis. This is ansa cervicalis here. Okay, it is formed by a root from C1 coming with hypoglossal nerve. That is why it's called descended hypoglossi. And from C2 and C3 spinal segment, okay, making the inferior root. Okay, all those are found within the carotid triangle. Also within the carotid triangle, we have the 5 first branches of the external carotid artery. I will discuss the arteries and vessels of the sheath or of the neck, inshallah, in separate video. Last triangle within the anterior triangle or subdivision is called muscular triangle, because mainly it consists of strap muscles that run between the hyoid bone and the sternum. Those are superior belly of omohyoid, sternohyoid, and sternothyroid. This muscle. So we have 4 muscle, or called strap muscle, because they are like sheet and ascend vertically. Superior belly of omohyoid, okay, sternohyoid, sternothyroid, and then we have thyrohyoid. This is thyrohyoid. All those muscle or infrahyoid muscle are supplied by the branches from ansa cervicalis, so derived from the cervical plexus. That is all about the triangles of the neck. If you have any question, do not hesitate. You can contact me anytime.